This time I have a Sony SLVR1000. The complaint on this one is it has a bad picture. Basically, half the picture is missing, the top half. It's noise. And it also doesn't load properly. When it goes to unload the tape, it doesn't unload. That's what it is. It sticks. It won't raise the tape up. So we got a couple of faults on this one. Let's see what the problem is. Here I have another one of my favorite units. And I say that it's not in a bad way. I do like these units. SLVR1000. It's a Sony Super VHS machine. It's one of the better Super VHS machines I think you're going to find in recent vintage. They do have a few known quirks, and this has probably got that known quirk, and that would be the blue gear that breaks on all of these units. That was a weakness. But that part's also still readily available. Other problems that these ones have is, and it's likely affected this one. For sure, yep, blue gear's broken. You can see it here, the guide is all the way to the end of the travel. Actually, the guide's come unattached. The guide's fallen right off completely on this. I wonder if the blue gear failed or whether just the pin pulled out. See, the pin's pulled right out of here. So it might be, the blue gear might not be damaged on this. It might be that the pin just worked its way loose. Other issues that these ones have is there's a, on the motor, sometimes the plastic coupling here cracks and it causes it to slip. Anyway, we got to pull this mechanism apart, as I do need to remove the chassis in order to find out what happened to this guide. Did the blue gear break or did a pin just pop out? We'll find out pretty quick and get this one back up and running. Other problems that these ones have is that sometimes the grease here dries up on this arm, but it has not, so that's okay. First things first, I have to remove the deck from the chassis itself. So we do that by releasing the tabs that hold the front panel on. Remove the front panel. Unplugging it right here. Now the front panel can be set aside. Next, I need to remove the front loading mechanism. So we'll unplug that plug, undo the 4 screws, we'll do an inspection on the front loader when I get it out here first and see whether that gear is cracked, which is quite common on the motor itself. So there's 4 screws that hold the front loading mechanism in place. Lift those out and the front loader will lift right out. Now what I'm talking about is quite often this cracks, and it actually has cracked. If we look closely, you can see, if the camera will focus, you can see where it's cracked. Is the camera going to focus? Probably not, because I'm too close. Try that here. You can see the crack right there. You see? Right there, there's a crack in the collar on the motor. And what happens is it allows the motor to slip. The motor will spin, but the actual gear here will slip. This will slip. So to fix that, I have to actually remove the motor assembly by just releasing a couple tabs on here. Take the motor off of the rest of the front loading housing. We can deal with this while we've got this right here right now. Okay, just set that aside. Here's where the fault is. Right on. You can see it cracked right there. So what happens is the plastic splits. And this is what this part does. This is what provides some play. And the plastic splits and causes it to start to slip. See, this should not be moving that easily. It's because this plastic piece is broken. So the way to fix this is we actually have to glue it onto the motor shaft itself while leaving enough play that it can move back and forth slightly. So the way to do that is we need to I got to remove this gear so I can remove the motor so that I can actually glue this in place. Okay. There's the alignment holes there, you see. So when it's in the eject position, those holes line up. So we'll remove the gear, and now I can get in here and remove these screws. Okay, the key here is to glue this onto the shaft. If we look down at where it cracks, it's usually right at a molding point too, where the injection molding was done. That's usually where they always break. That's the weak spot. So what I'm going to use on this is some two-part epoxy. This stuff is very old too. The last little bit in the tube, so hopefully it'll be okay, because I've had it for a couple years. So just mixing some. It's not JB Weld or anything. It's just regular epoxy glue, and we'll put a bit of this onto the shaft here, and then put the back half of the wheel on here, and hopefully that will be enough to hold this in place. Take it down to about where I believe it goes, right about there. Maybe put a bit on the front here as well. Nah, probably not. That's supposed to provide a little bit of slack between the two. Alright, let's put this back together before this sets up, and make sure I've got my positioning correct here for it. This is kind of an important part to do this before it sets, otherwise you might not ever get it set in the right position. Okay, I want to make sure that none of that epoxy is going to bind the motor. I'm going to spin the motor now. Give it about 8 volts just to spin it. This way any epoxy that was on the back of the motor here, on the back side of the shaft, that could possibly bind with the motor will be spun out by centrifugal force. And it'll just remain on the actual shaft itself and into that cracked color. I'll let this thing run for a bit here and let the epoxy set up. I know that the epoxy is still probably good because where I mixed it up on the paper, it's getting hot. So that's a good indication that the actual glue itself, the epoxy, is still getting a chemical reaction, so it hasn't failed due to old age, even though it's been sitting around for years and years and years. It's still seems to be activating, so that should fix this problem up with this one. I'll reassemble the gear assembly and the motor. should be good. Okay, that should have the front loader repaired. Let's move on. You guys should see what just walked in the door. Keep you guys drooling over this. Got an amplifier. The Sonic Frontiers SFS40 vacuum tuber, 1 channel out. So that'll be something that's coming up at some point in time. Don't know when I'm going to get to it because I'm just so bloody busy that I don't know what day of the week it is. Okay, so now we'll take out the rest of the chassis. We're going to remove these screws that hold the chassis in. Try and do this without hitting the camera with my forehead. I really do need a better camera crane than what I've got, as this one sometimes gets in the way. Have to undo the straps here. This one's never been removed before, as they're still taped in place. I got to take off this sticky tape to unplug them. Unplug the head drum, and there's a couple more screws at the back here that need to come out. Namely these ones that go to the preamp. One more screw here. That head cleaning arm is going to come out to its shot. We'll take that out right now. That's removed just by pulling this little catch, and this whole arm will lift off. Because that's worn out. You can see how badly that's worn. It's actually deteriorated, falling right apart. That's an extra piece. It's not required on a machine these days. It was a good idea, but they caused a lot more headaches than they were solved. We'll bend up this little round tab here out of the way, or remove it. Okay, now the mechanism will lift out. Disconnect the full race head as well. And now the entire mechanism will just lift right out just like this. There we go. Okay, now I can put the rest of the chassis out of the way. There, like that. Now we can open up the bottom of the deck itself and see what happened. Did that blue gear break, or did it just, the guide just come apart? I guess we'll find out pretty quick. I do have a blue gear here in case I do need to change it, but we got the screws out. One more screw here. The blue gear has not broken on this one. It's the guide pin has fallen apart. So this should be a little different repair than what I was anticipating. Actually, this is easier because I don't have to take the mechanism apart. All I need to do is I just need to remove the cut washer here so that I can take the guide pin that's still here, sticking through the chassis. I can take that off and re-secure it back into the guide itself, and then put the guide back together. So let's just take off the cut washer. Well, we can push this pin through from this side. And this is why you got to take this apart to fix it anyway, because if you try to put the guide on without removing the base, you're never going to do it. It's going to just push the pin through. So basically you're going to take the cut washer off here, and then this guide pin, it fits into the bottom of this guide like this, and it goes right in the middle right there, and it's got to be pushed up to flush with the guide itself. I'm just going to use a pair of pliers to squeeze this together. It is a fairly tight fit, so why it came apart is anyone's guess, but it just sits flush like that. I'm going to put some glue on there to hold it in place, so we'll just pull it off and I get some glue on there, and we'll glue this piece in place. So I got the good old Loctite crazy glue here. We'll put some of this on the end of the guide here, and then shove this guide pin in all the way, and that should set it up. Once it dries, we'll let that seal up. That'll prevent that from ever dropping back down again. Why is it that crazy glue always congeals in the end of the tube? No matter how tightly you seal it up, it always fails every time. Every time I go to use it, either got to use usually a screwdriver, usually use one of these little fine, like a point, was it 0.7 millimeter? End up stabbing myself trying to get the stupid thing to unblock, but it's a pain. Every time I go to use crazy glue, it is sealed up. I think maybe a piece of coax might be also work, but like the center connector from coax, but you need something pretty strong. A copper wire won't work because the glue itself is pretty solid. So that should set up relatively quickly. We can now put this back together. I'll put the guide back in position, drop the guide in, and in the process I'll pull back the tension regulator so I can reset the guide. Just like that. And now I can put the cut washer back on the bottom, and that should fix this mechanism. So usually, as I say, usually that blue gear breaks, but maybe it's been replaced on this one, or it just hasn't broken. But that's usually the weak link, is the blue gear. But as we saw on this one, it didn't break. So because it didn't break, there's no real reason to do anything to it. No need to change what isn't broken. Could it break down the road? Well, possibly it could, but then again, it might not. Not all of them did. Probably won't hurt to clean the mode switch on this while I'm at it, so we'll just loosen off this screw. Remove the tooth belt so that I can remove the mode switch. You'll notice that the alignment, there's a couple of little alignment markers here. We're just going to make sure that they are in the correct position, which they are. You can see it here. Got the little indicator here pointing towards that little hole. That shows us that we're in the correct position. So we'll just pop out the mode switch. Clean the mode switch while we're at it. Just like that. Take the mode switch apart by just squeezing the little tabs on the bottom here, and the mode switch pops apart to reveal a mode switch which is not super dirty. It's this is owned by a guy that does archiving, so this machine probably does get a fair bit of use. So use is what keeps them clean. It doesn't look to be too dirty. We are going to clean it while we have it apart. I would say that there was a fair bit of oxide on those contacts. So let's get a little bit more contact cleaner. This is to keep them clean, and we'll just put a bit more on the Q-tip here and use that to clean the switch contacts themselves. Put the switch back together, rotate it a few times, and now I can put the switch back into the mechanism. There's our alignment hole right there. Drop it in place. And line it up, line it up with the other marker. Turn the switch into place, and in order to drop it down we have to actually pull this little pink colored lever so that it'll drop into place. So we just pull it that way. That'll allow the gear to drop into place. A couple screws back in. Thread the belt back onto the capstan motor. This being a nylon toothed belt, is never going to wear out. And I've mentioned this before, but the reason that this spring is here, it's only there for one reason, so that it has the correct amount of tension. Otherwise people would be pulling the tension too tight. As you can see, you can pull it tighter if you try. So, and you can also make it looser if you try, and in that way it's going to slip. So the spring is there only for one purpose, and that's just initial setup. Right? Once you've got that thing set in place, you can tighten down the screw, and this is not going to change. So the spring is kind of useless at that point. They just put it in place for that one purpose, for setting it up the first time. And after that, it's completely unnecessary. So I'm going to glue the other guide back in place while I'm here, because if one was loose, the other one probably is not far behind. And that is this guide here. If we look at this one, how nice and tight this one is now, this one here is kind of floppy. And we can see, if we look at the actual guide pin here, or the anchor pin, it looks like it's starting to drop down a bit. So I'm just going to put a drop of my good old crazy glue, providing it hasn't sealed up again inside the tube, which tends to happen pretty quick on this crap. Drop of glue on there. And before it sets up, I got to push it through from the bottom, so I'll put my finger on there and hold it in place and just push this down if I can to set it up. Bring this up as high as I possibly can. Put the circuit board on. And I'll tell you, today I was having lunch, and I had some guy just walk up and sit down at my table and start asking me questions about a Yamaha tape deck. And the guy probably comes off thinking I'm an asshole because of what I said to him. I quoted pretty much to the line Billy Bob Thornton from Bad Santa. If you remember the scene when the kid came up to him and started talking to him when he was in the lunch court, what he said to him? Well, I basically said that. I'm having my effing lunch, piss off. And then his response was, well, there's no reason to be rude. I said to him, you want to talk rude? I'm having my lunch. I said, I don't know what your problem with your tape deck is. It's not sitting in front of me. I'm not looking at it. I don't know what the problem with it is. It says, like everybody that asked me questions on the forums about models I've never heard of before, and when I don't respond to them, they ask it on about 20 other videos, repeat the same question over and over and over again. So I said to him, you know, I said, I'm just the guy that does the repairs. The real guy is standing over my shoulder, whispering in my ear, telling me what to do. I just kind of kidding with him there, but maybe he bought it. Maybe he got the message anyway. He got up and left, but it's like the nerve of people. You know, now I know why you get you know, actors and musicians and stuff that when they go out in public they're wearing disguises because they don't want fans coming up to them, talking to them all the time. You know, when I do the videos, it's kind of one thing. When I'm not doing this stuff, when I'm not repairing stuff, it's just, I don't want to even talk about electronics with anybody. I could care less about this stuff. Okay, time to put the unit back together. So, first things first, let's drop the mechanism back in. Mechanism goes in pretty simple on these. Get the little connectors over here in place so you don't bend them, and it just kind of just drops in place. There's nothing real fancy about this. It just sits in place and it will drop over a couple of alignment. I think there's just one back here actually. It's going to make sure that the ground tabs are in place, and I can start fastening the screws back down that hold the chassis in place. There's one back here. There's a smaller metal type screw to hold the ground strap in place for the preamp. Remember, this board is quite fragile in this area here, so don't put any excessive pressure on it when you're working on it. I had one shipped in that was purchased from an eBay seller that was supposedly completely serviced, and well, you guys remember that one maybe a month or so ago, that the board had a break right in here that someone had tried to fix and they didn't do it right. These are the clips that hold the front half and the side of the chassis in place. One clip there, another little clip that goes on this side over here. Now I've got the head preamp that goes into the head that plugs into the preamp. This is from the rotary transformer. On here, that plugs into here. Got the audio control head that plugs in over here somewhere, wherever it went. And then the wires go under this little clip. Like that. And this little wire tie holds it in place. We got the other two connectors that plug in over here. And the front loader. Two silver screws up front and two black screws in the back. At this point, the unit is almost ready to test. I'm going to put the front panel on so that the controls are connected. Plug the panel in. And then the front panel just snaps in place. Just line it up and it will snap in place just like that. Real easy to put this one together. Okay, let's test it and see what it does. Alright, got it plugged in. Let's turn it on. Got a couple of tapes to try on here. Let's just try the Super VHS tape of my Vancouver aquarium. It loads. Tape threads as normal, and does it play? Yes, it does. It plays perfect. There we go. It's looking pretty good. Even on the plasma. If we bring my hand near the video head, I'm sure I'll get interference, which I do. But that's to be expected. Just because these big plasma TVs throw off so darn much RF from them. That's why they're hated by ham radio operators. And I'm sure someone's going to comment in here about calling them RF disturbers. But I still love my old plasma TVs. I like them. I've got a couple of them here. And I will continue to use them as long as they operate. Just because I like the picture. And you know, I had a buddy that he has a plasma, and he went and he found himself a used Panasonic OLED TV, and he plugged it in, and he's telling me, you know, it looks great, but he still likes the picture off of its old plasma. He says you know, as good as the OLED set is, he thinks that his plasma has a more natural looking picture. He said it almost looks too sharp, but this is standard definition, obviously. This is a really old plasma. This one goes back to 2000. I think this is 2003, this set. So it's not even HD. But for looking at standard definition sources, such as this tape playing here in Super VHS, it actually looks excellent. And this machine is working perfect. Let's try out search forward. Search forward's working good. Search backwards working good. The alignment is looking good on this one. I don't even need to check it because the alignment wasn't touched. The guides themselves are tight. It's just the guide fell out. So this one's looking good. Go to full speed rewind. Going full speed. Back into play. Like, people quite often ask me, they're looking for a Super VHS deck. They say, which one should I get? Should I buy an AG 1970? Should I buy an AG 1980? And my answer to them is always the same. Avoid those ones like the plague, because they are very problematic. If you want to find a good, of recent vintage Super VHS machine that should last you for a long time, look no further than the SLVR1000 or the SVO2000, which is the same unit. I have an SVO2000 that I recently picked up. And the reason I grabbed it was because it's the same mechanism as this. And yes, they have their issues. The blue gear can break on it. It's not a big deal. It's a cheap part. It's readily available. They still make the parts. But the reliability of these mechanisms is actually pretty good. There wasn't a lot of problems with this. There's a few things. The capstan bearing sometimes bends on it and you have to straighten it up. And the blue gear breaks. But from an operational perspective, these machines really work well, and they don't cause a lot of issues as some machines do. They're pretty simple. It's using Sony's original VHS design. It's the same chassis that was used on the SLVR5, the SLV555, the 575. All those Sony VHS chassis are based on the same design. It was a well-designed mechanism that doesn't give us a lot of trouble. I guess I better reconnect the full erase head here, right? That might be a good idea. Someone probably spotted that, but so did I. But yeah, these were a pretty good unit. Other than the odd quirk, the guide that gets seized up that you have to lubricate, that sometimes just little the capstan bearing, that was a common problem on the earlier ones, where the metal was a little bit too thin and it bent. But these ones, power supply wise, I haven't seen any power supplies fail on these. The R5, yes, they had bad caps. Same with the 757 and the 555 and all those older ones. They all had bad caps in them, so the power supply needs to be rebuilt on those. These ones here, I haven't seen any of these ones fail yet. Doesn't mean that they won't, but I just haven't seen any fail, and they've been around for quite a few years now, and they're still going strong. So I think maybe the capacitor problem was probably past when these ones were built. But if you're looking for a good Super VHS machine for like archiving tapes, if you can find one of these without paying an arm and a leg, it's probably a good deal. Saying that, I know that the sharks out there are going to be asking $500 and $600 for it. Maybe even more, and if someone were to come along and offer that to mine, I probably would be a fool not to take it, but I picked up my SVO2000 for 25 bucks. Just saying, they're out there. If you look, there's people that have these units that are done with them and they just want to get rid of them. And if you look in places other than eBay, you can generally pick them up pretty reasonable. And I bought mine privately. I did not buy it in a store. I did not buy it. I did not bid on it. It just showed up on Facebook Marketplace, and I picked up two of them. I picked up the SLVR1000, which I had to rebuild the power supply on, and the SVO2000 for $50 for the two of them. With remote controls, I might add. Anyway, this one's done. I'm just letting it play here. Everything's looking good. We'll hit the eject button. Oh, and that plastic breaks too. But once you fix that, it's good. And it should be good for a while. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.